Hello, my crochet crafter friends. Today we're going to learn how to make a very simple bohemian puff stitch blanket. For tutorial purposes, I'm using a size L, which is an 11 8mm hook, very large hook. You can use whatever size you want. It's going to make your project larger or smaller depending on the hook. So if you want to use a much smaller one, just remember you're going to have to chain more. If you want to use a larger one with a bulky yarn, feel free. This is a very freestyle project. So for tutorial purposes, I'm not going to use that green bulky yarn you saw at the beginning of my YouTube video. What I'm going to use is this nice white red heart because it's going to be easy to show you how to do a puff stitch with this. So go ahead and get your yarn onto your hook. There are a couple of different ways of doing this, and however you've learned, that's fine. There's no right or wrong answer. The only thing that I ask of you is that when you're making your blanket, if you want to make a small blanket, you may want to chain 72. If you're making a twin, you may want to chain 152. If you're making a queen, you may want to chain maybe 250, 260. And if you're chaining a king, you may want to chain 350 to 400, depending on, again, the size of your crochet hook and the thickness of your yarn. So let's go ahead and chain whatever amount you want. You can pause me and get your chain started. And for tutorial purposes, I'm only going to do a small amount so that I can show you how this works. But you should chain as many as you want for your project. So here's what we're going to do. To get started, you want to skip 2 after you've got your chains made. And we're going to do our first puff stitch into the 3rd one. So what we're going to do is we're going to wrap our yarn around our hook of whatever size we've chosen. We're going to insert it into that stitch, the 3rd one over. We're going to pull it up. And as you can see, there are 1, 2, 3 on the hook. You're going to wrap it over again, and you're going to pull it through that same stitch. You're going to wrap it through, pull it through. Now you have 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You're going to wrap it through again. And here's a little tip for you if you're not, if you're a newbie at this. Grab this, hold this stitch with your thumb and your finger, and so you can kind of pull it out. So when you go through, you're making it easy on yourself to get that puff stitch through, okay? And make sure that you've left, again, I mean, these links look very, very loose, but I'm going to show you why you wanted them loose. So after every puff stitch, you're going to chain 1. So make sure every time you do a puff stitch in your work, you're chaining 1, because we're going to work through that as we come back in the next row. So wrap it around, and in the next stitch next to the puff stitch, you just, the bump or the puff stitch, either one is fine, whatever you want to call it, just pull it through, and you've got 3. 1, 2, 3. You wrap it around again, and you pull it through that same stitch, and you've got 1, 2, you've got 5. Now wrap it around and hold this stitch so you can pull it through nice and easy, and you've got your second puff stitch. Chain 1, and we're going to go through and do a couple more of these. If you've already got the idea and you're not a novice at this, go ahead and keep going, but I'm going to work with those beginners, and we're going to go through the next one. We're going to pull it through again. 1, 2, 3. Wrap it around, and what are we going to do? We're going to go through, pull it through, and we've got how many? 5. So 5, folks. We wrap it through, and that one that you just wrapped, we're going to pull that through all 5 of those loops, all 5. Now you've got another puff stitch. What do? Make sure you chain 1. If you don't chain 1, you're going to mess this whole thing up. So make sure you've chained 1 after each puff stitch. Another puff stitch, wrap it around, pull it through that next chain, 3 on the hook, wrap it around, pull it through again, 5 on the hook. What are we going to do? Wrap it around. There we go, another puff stitch. Chain 1. We're going to go do another puff stitch. And if you want to pause me and get to the end of the row, whatever your blanket is, or if you've just done a sample like me to see if you can do it, that's fine too. When we get to the end, I'm going to show you how to turn it and how to make your blanket. And if you don't want to do this and you want me to do a blanket for you, you can request a custom order on my Etsy site, which is also Lori's Handiwork, which is the same as my YouTube channel. I'll be happy to make you a puff stitch blanket of any size, shape. Well, shape, it has to be a certain shape, but any color. So when we get to the end here, people, of your last chain to do your puff stitch, you can work your tail in. Now, if you're a newbie to this and you're not used to working your tail in, you can sew it in. So don't get hung up on this if you can't work your tail. But I'm going to grab my tail right now. I'm going to wrap it around and I'm going to pull it through that last puff stitch. And then you're going to chain 2. So if you are one of those people that paused me and you wanted to wait to get to the end of your blanket, the first row, that's sort of what your blanket should look like. It may be a little tight on the end here, and it may look like it's going to curve in. But once you have done 3 or 4 rows of your blanket, trust me, it will straighten out. But if you've done the end really, really tight, it's gonna look really tight in your blanket. So that's why you wanted to make sure that you crochet that first row rather loose. So if you've done your 2, if you've chained 2 at the end, you want to look for that first gap in those puff stitches, and that's where you've made your chain in between your puff stitches, and that's where you're going to work your next puff stitch in for your second row on your blanket. So whatever blanket you have. So you're going to wrap it around and pull it through that gap, and you have 3. Wrap it around, pull it through the gap. So you're always doing the same size puff stitch. Now, some people want it even puffier. If you want to do that, you can do a third, wrap around. But see how I'm wrapping around 3? I'm wrapping around and I'm wrapping around 4. And I have 5. If you wanted to wrap around and go through another time, you could do that. And that would really make your blanket puffy. But I like having 5 to go through because it's manageable, it looks nice, and it's not too difficult, and you'll tend to make less mistakes with that puff stitch. So you're going in between the puff stitches you made in the first row. You're chaining 1 after every puff stitch. You're going through the gap in between the puff stitches that you made, and it's the chain. So when you're chaining, that's the chain is what you're going to go through in the next row. So that's another puff stitch. There you go. And not all crochet hooks are created equal, folks. So if you have a crochet hook that's very rough, and or you need a crochet hook because you need to grab it at the end because you like that big rubber band at the end, you can buy that kind of a crochet hook. I grew up old school, and these were the only kind of crochet hooks we had. But this is a very nice, smooth crochet hook, and it tends to grab all the yarn really easily, which is what I like. So I'm using this one for the puff stitches. Again, if it's gotten old, if your crochet hook is old and it's got problems and it's scratchy, get rid of it and get a new one. So I've done 2 rows. At the end of the other row, remember how we chained 2? Well, what you want to do in order to pull that up is you're going to go ahead and create that last puff stitch right in that chain as if it was a chain that you did, and you pull it through. And so that's what it's going to look like, because you want it to have that consistent look throughout. That's what it's going to look like. So I'm going to do one more row with you, and if you're bored and you know how to do this, fine, you can go off and do it yourself. If not, pat yourself on the back as a newbie, and we'll do some more puff stitches together. So make sure you do that chain 2, and what are we going to do? We're going to go in between the 2 puff stitches. 3, wrap it around, 5, wrap it around and pull it through, holding your yarn, chaining 1, wrap it around, 5, holding this, pulling it through, chaining 1, wrapping it around, 3, wrapping it around, 5, wrapping it around, pulling it through. Make sure you have a yarn too that's not all tangled at the end, because if you have to pull your yarn to get it through, that can be challenging too. This is a great stitch for a hat, and I'm going to do a video on making a hat. So it's really very simple, and it's so much fun and so soft and cuddly. This is my last row of puff stitches, people, that I'm going to show you how to do. And then I'm going to let you go off. But you see how I worked my tail in here? So I worked it in, so really all I have to do is just cut this piece off right there, and it's going to stay fine because I crocheted it back through my work. So on my 3rd row of my puff stitches, and at the end of the row, you see how you chain that 2? Chain that 2. You have to go through that. Yes, I know it's not a single chain, but you have to go through it so that you're consistent with how your blanket looks. So that's really, I mean, when you get done with your blanket, that's going to be a gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous puff stitch blanket. So I hope you enjoyed this easy tutorial, and please subscribe and like my YouTube channel. I would really appreciate it. It would help me out, and I hope I'm helping you as well. So have a great day, and I will see you soon.